Now, this budget is going to be presented under the most difficult and, in fact, in some ways, the most desperate circumstances. The problem is compounded by the fact that this is supposed to be an election year. They will engage in some very creative figure fudging and very innovative accounting. If you can't feed them with wheat and flour and vegetables because of inflation, then at least you can feed them with some data. Everything else, defense, subsidies, running the civil government, virtually everything else will be on borrowed money. They've done something quite absurd and quite wacky, if I might call it that. They are probably tempting a fate much worse than death. On June 9th, it is expected that Pakistan's finance minister will present the budget for the financial year 24. Now, this budget is going to be presented under the most difficult and, in fact, in some ways, the most desperate circumstances for Pakistan. Of course, you won't know how difficult the situation is as far as the economy is concerned if you look at the lifestyles of the rich, famous and the powerful in Pakistan. But the fact of the matter is that the Pakistan economy is literally running on the fumes, and even the fumes are ending now. Now, it is under these circumstances that this budget is being passed. But it's not just the economy and the economic problems that appear to be intractable. There is also a massive political crisis which is there in the country, and of course a security crisis. Now, the problem is compounded by the fact that this is supposed to be an election year. If everything goes according to constitution, then elections are supposed to be held in October, maybe November. Of course, that is assuming everything goes according to constitution, because if everything actually went according to the constitution, we would not be seeing many of the scenes that we are seeing today in Pakistan, a country where actually the constitution is followed more in its breach than its observance. Now, normally, because this is an election year, one would expect that it would be a very expansionary budget. The only problem is that there is no fiscal space left for the government to unveil an expansionary budget. This problem is compounded by the fact that the government, literally the politicians heading the government across the political spectrum, because it's almost like a national government right now, these are guys who have their entire political life at stake because of the economy. So they desperately need a budget in which they can throw some money around, slosh some money around, and try and win over or buy the affections of the electorate. Now, the problem for the finance minister and the government is going to be that they will have to do a very difficult balancing act between their political compulsions and the expectations of the international financial community, especially the IMF, who still has not given them or restored the enhanced funding facility program to Pakistan, without which it becomes extremely difficult for Pakistan to get money from other external sources. And I think they will do a balancing act, and they will do this balancing act in the only way that the Pakistanis know how to do a balancing act. They will pull a rabbit out of their hat, in which, despite going in for an expansionary budget, they will engage in some very creative figure fudging and very innovative accounting. After all, you have when you have a finance minister who's basically an accomplished chartered accountant, very adept at figure fudging, then he will indulge in something like that to make all the sums meet, to make all the tables and the balance sheets and the other accounts look pretty elegant and pretty plausible, and use it to create some kind of a feel-good factor for the people, give them some hope for the future. If you can't feed them with wheat and flour and vegetables because of inflation, then at least you can feed them with some data which makes them feel that there's something to look forward to, and it's not as though the entire country is going to the dust. And try and give a feeling that things are going to stabilize and improve from here on, and then use the same set of data to convince the international financial community, the lenders, donors, IMF, what have you, that the Pakistan government has been fiscally responsible. But I'm not quite sure if the financial markets are going to be fooled by Mr. Ishaq Dar, the finance minister's shenanigans on the Pakistan economy. In a way, it is a kind of a mission impossible, because nobody in the financial world is going to buy the data he is selling, and the people on the ground, apart from the most die-hard people, I think the economic distress levels have reached a point where people are not going to be satisfied by being fed on hope. They need something tangible, and frankly, there is very little tangible to give to them. Now, the problem is going to be that the voodoo economics in Pakistan, which is also called Daronomics after Mr. Ishaq Dar, the man who has literally run the Pakistan economy into the ground, it's just not working anymore. Last two times he has been the finance minister, he also did the same thing. He left the economy in a mess. But I think they are going to have a major problem this time around, because now nobody is buying what the guy is selling. Mr. Dar's credibility has also suffered tremendously because of his shenanigans. So much so that in the last couple of meetings which the Pakistanis have held with the IMF, trying to convince the IMF to restore the program, Dar has not been allowed to sit in those meetings. There was a meeting between Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and the IMF chief. The junior minister who is an economist, Aisha Pasha, she sat in on the meeting. The Secretary Finance and some senior officials sat in on that meeting. But Dar, the man who's supposed to be the financial czar, was not allowed to sit in on the meetings. Even on the other delegation level meetings that are taking place online, Dar is not invited, partly because Dar has this bull in a china shop approach, partly because he thinks he's the greatest economist in the world when he doesn't know anything about economics, and frankly I think the IMF is pretty cut up with the guy. So he ruins things much more than he solves. So he's been kept out, but he can't be thrown out of the finance ministry simply because he happens to be the father-in-law of one of Nawaz Sharif's daughters. Since he is a close family member, not only do the Sharifs have to suffer him, Pakistan has to suffer him. Now, the big problem for Pakistan is going to be that the economy now is in such a bad shape that even stabilizing the economy is almost as difficult as bringing in structural reforms. Now, this is saying something, because normally stabilization or stabilizing the economy is relatively easier than bringing in structural reforms. But courtesy what Imran Khan and what Mr. Dar and others have done over the last few years, now even stabilization is becoming very difficult for the economy. For the ruling coalition, however, there is one positive so far, which is that politically, although they face a very, very tough time going forward, the fact that Imran Khan and his party is being dismantled means that the political compulsions and the political pressures on the ruling combination is not what it would have been if Imran Khan had a run of the place. This is not a show on the future of Imran Khan, but I think that would cut some slack for the incumbents. But on the flip side, many of these guys who are currently in coalition will be fighting an election against each other, and many of the opponents of the leading party in the coalition, which is Muslim League Nawaz, they have not taken the same flack for the economic mismanagement as the Muslim League Nawaz has taken. So I think there will be that competition between them as well, and this would probably negate some of the positives that would come their way because of the dismantlement of the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf and of Imran Khan and his politics. It is almost confirmed, it is not just almost confirmed, it is given that Pakistan is now well and truly in a debt trap situation. Whatever revenues will be earned by the federal government in the next fiscal year, that is fiscal year 23-24, that revenue will be almost 1 trillion rupees short, less than the debt servicing obligations of the federal government. So clearly, everything else, defense, subsidies, running the civil government, virtually everything else will be on borrowed money, which means that the debt is only going to grow and the debt servicing obligations are only likely to grow. Although if interest rates were to come down from 21% right now to about even a few percentage points, that would give some debt relief, but the quantum of debt is rising, growth is not keeping pace, so I don't think they will be able to manage to get out of this debt trap situation which they are caught up in. So bankruptcy is staring Pakistan in the face when this next budget is presented. Situation is so bad that last year independent economists in Pakistan have calculated that the growth was negative. It was about negative 0.5%, might have been even lower. According to some estimates, it was even much lower. But again, the Dar magic came into play. It was not a sustainable, politically sustainable to say that growth was negative. So Mr. Dar and his cronies, juggled around the figures and presented a somewhat positive picture by saying that last year, that is in 22-23, the economy grew by just about 0.3%. Now this, in a country where population growth is almost 3%, means that basically people have actually been becoming poorer. Something which is also reflected in the fact that the economy, at least in dollar terms, has contracted from about 375 billion GDP in the year before last to last year, or the ending, or this year which is closing. The GDP has come down to about 340 billion. The per capita income in dollar terms has also collapsed. Now, for the next year, from a 0.3% growth which they've achieved in 23, the Pakistanis imagine that, or at least are projecting that growth will be around 3.5%. But this is virtually impossible. But because they need to show that their economy has stabilized and is likely to grow, they have done something, at least this is what the reports which are coming out, they've done something quite absurd and quite wacky, if I might call it that. The budget this year, or which is likely to come in the next few days, is expected, the size of the budget is expected to be 50% more than the budget of 2023. Now, to get a perspective, in 21-22, the budget which was presented was just about 18 to 19% bigger than the budget of the previous year. Last year, the budget that was presented was just about 13% more than the previous year's budget. And the situation in both those years was not as bad as what it is today. This time around, the budget is likely, the size of the budget is likely to go up by 50%. Now, clearly, there is no money. So, there is a lot of people are asking the question as to where you are going to get the money from to fund this kind of thing. Now, of course, they will present some really fancy numbers on revenue, on where they are going to collect taxes. Again, a story that we have been seeing repeat itself over the last 20 odd years with the same result, which is zero. And this means that when they are going in for this kind of an expansionary budget and they don't have the resources, they are probably tempting a fate much worse than death. We might start looking at Pakistan slip into a hyperinflation kind of a situation. Virtually everything that can go wrong will probably go wrong if things don't match up to the kind of assumptions which are underlying this budget. In this particular budget, what they are going to be doing is that they are going to increase the developmental budget, which was just about 650 billion, almost doubling it. Where is the money? The subsidy bill has gone up. Again, no idea where and remember, even if the money is there, that money is going to come from borrowings, because I've already explained that the entire revenue is lower than the debt service expenditure for the next fiscal year. So even the debt servicing is going to be paid from debt, and your developmental expenses, your subsidies, your running of the civil government is all coming from new debt. And of course, there is going to be the whole business of defense spending. At a time when the army is back in the saddle, controlling all the levers of power, you have a government leaning over backward to accommodate the army. The best that can be hoped for is that the army will not demand an increase in their budget. That's the best that can be hoped for. But if the army is also going to demand an increase, then so it's like, look, I'm sinking anyway, so whatever anybody wants to take, I'm willing to give, because in any case, all of it is coming from borrowed funds. So who gives a damn what happens after that? And that seems to be the calculation. Maybe the political calculation is that, let us give this nice fancy budget, something which they did in 2018 as well. Give a nice fancy feel good budget, hand over power to the caretakers, and then when all hell breaks loose because you've been fiscally irresponsible with a fictitious budget, then blame it all on the caretakers, and caretakers can be a patsy for everybody, simply because they are not going to be politicians, they are not going to be fighting elections, they have very little to say to defend themselves, and they are not answerable or accountable to anybody, except perhaps to the army. So you can always blame it on them. So give these nice fancy figures. The only problem is going to be when you give these nice fancy figures, and we'll see the figures when the budget comes out. I think the international financial markets are going to react very, very adversely. And if that happens, then it becomes so much more difficult even for the caretakers to take a control of the situation. The inflation rate is almost 40% in the country. In India right now, it's just over 4%, just around 4%. The food inflation and inflation rate of very essential commodities is almost 50% per annum. And the next year, at least the very positive projections which are being given are that inflation will be controlled and will still be above about 20%. So, if you look at the kind of vicious circle in which the economy is caught, it's very clear that the Pakistanis simply have no idea on how they want to fix things. The only way something will happen is either if they actually hunker down and decide that they are going to reform the economy and pay the kind of price which will have to be paid for the economy to be put back on the rails, or they decide, okay, fine, let's live it up for as long as we can, and one fine day everybody has to die. So if the economy dies, heavens are not going to fall, we'll rebuild the economy. If that's the plan, I don't know. But the only third option available for them is that there are tons of money which is poured into Pakistan, as happened in 2001 and even earlier in the 1980s because of Afghanistan, but probably that's not likely to happen, or at least unless some great black swan event takes place, that's not on the anvil. That's where matters lie, and next week, if the budget does come out, then we will do a deep dive analysis of the budget to see how much it is real and how much it is fictitious, and even try and do some analysis of where all the disastrous Mr. Dar has fudged with the figures, given this cock and bull story to the rest of the world, tried to paint a very optimistic picture of the Pakistan economy, but that we'll hold on till the budget documents come.